Hebridean remote kit comes with the standard instruction and plans booklet as normal with John Fleming's kits. All the parts are individually packaged in the same way as the Windvane kit, and I have labelled all the parts to make my life easier for construction. The wood block supplied is a template to fix parts 32A and B in the correct position for welding. You can either get a local fabricator to do this for you for a few pounds, or if you have an arc welder, attempt it yourself. I ordered stainless arc rods and found it pretty straightforward, only a small increase in the current required for a good arc. It should be noted that I am a novice welder, but I did practice with some spare stainless offcuts before the real job. Here's the completed weld prior to being cleaned up with a grinder. It's very solid because I've given it a good thump with a hammer, so that looks like a good one. Going to assemble the worm gear now. The plastic cog itself, you press in this bush which has got a 6mm threaded insert. Coat it with epoxy and then press it gently in, leaving 1mm sticking out of the front or the top. You can just about see maybe there's a pre-drilled hole which you'll need then to drill through to the other side to put a pin in to actually stop the thing rotating on the actual bush itself. Alright, we have to take part 28, which is this one, and we have 4 5mm by 32 bolts to put into the bottom through these holes. You don't need to do these up tightly at this point. Anyway, so there we go. You have to put these in first because the next stage I'm going to put some more bolts through which are going to be used for lining this. Now then, let's check. Right, the cog, having been allowed to set, is going to fit in there, which you'll see there's an immediate problem. It doesn't actually fit. We now put these bolts through the holes here, but we do need then to put on some M5 nuts, and the reason for that will become apparent as we go on. So, a couple of nuts on these two. And same at the back. Horrendously long at the moment, and I think they are, but you'll see the reason for that in a moment. So right, there's the first one on. Run that up to there, and I'll do the same with this one. And it is quite important to get this the right way round, by the way. So I've double checked this with the plans and the drawings, because we want the bits of thread sticking out the right side basically. Okay, next job is to take a couple of spanners and fix this end off. So basically put your spanner on, do this end up tight, so, like so. Okay, what we're going to do is we need to make this whole thing move out, and what we do is basically take the spanner and we put some pressure on, just so you get a little bit of pressure on, and then check it, and then couple of flats. 1, 2, and 1, 2. And that's opening up. And you do it one flat at a time, or possibly two just here because we're only just starting. 1, 2, and that's almost there. So one more flat, and one more flat. And now that's all just so close. Right, now you can see that actually slides down there quite happily. So I'm going to take the 6mm bolt that we've been provided with through the hole and through there. And it will fit. There we go. Put that through there, and we got it the whole way through. Okay, I've pushed or screwed the bolt all the way through, and now you can see that the whole thing rotates quite happily. We've used this to clamp and adjust these two bolts here to adjust the opening of this, so we want to put a couple of lock nuts on, which we should do, and then just lock it off so that's not going to move. You might put some Loctite on it if you feel that way inclined. Okay, clamp those up, put the two little bushes on here and a nylock, and that's actually a guide for the control strings. I'm not going to do it all the way in front of camera just at the moment. I'll cut it and then I shall show you the end result very shortly. It's worthwhile cleaning these two bushes up with a file and running a drill to make sure that they spin, because they actually do want to be able to move. Right, okay, I've tightened the nylocks up. These bushes can quite freely rotate, that's important, because your bit of string is going to go whizzing around there. So, next part is to put the 6mm bolt on, 6mm nut on here. Down to about there, I guess. Washer, and then a pulley, another washer, and another 6mm nut, which I can't get out the packet. There we go. And then these two nuts need to be locked off, and of course I haven't got a spanner with me, but there we go. That can go in a bit further, in fact. And again, it still needs, the whole thing needs to be able to rotate smoothly. Okay, I mean that's hopefully a fairly clear close-up. I haven't tightened these two nuts yet, which need to be adjusted, so you've got a little bit of play. This must remain free at all times. And the other important thing is, if you look at that, that is actually offset, and the fixed end of the 6mm bolt needs to be this side. So looking at it from the front as you are there, so that there to the fixed end there, and that is important, because otherwise it's not going to fit. Now this then goes on to part 32A and B, which if you've had it welded will look something like that, and then that will drop to hold this, and then you can adjust the height like so. Okay. Anyway, so there we are, that's the worm gear assembled. apart from drilling a small hole there to put the pin through, which actually locks this whole thing together, and chopping some of this thread off, which can be done nice and neatly. Close up view. You can see the whole thing should rotate like so. And it's important that is nice and smooth. The turret mount is basically started with parts 29 and 31. You actually put this onto the turret and mark the holes which are already pre-drilled in the stainless here onto the plastic, drill the plastic out, and then put the 4 bolts and nuts as shown, and that's actually to give the gap which mounts on the turret itself. The turret itself has had the 2 extra bolts fitted in here, and if like me you're using a kit already built, you'll have these slots cut in the top. It's a good idea to give it a little bit of a rub down and make sure that's smooth. You'll see the reason why shortly. Okay, to start assembling, we take the turret itself and feed it through like so, and you can see it will rotate with those bolts just holding it off a little bit. Okay, next job is to take parts 35 and A and B. One is the stainless piece of stainless which is all pre-drilled, and the other is the plastic block. The first thing to do is to actually put the steel onto the block like that and then drill through all of the holes. You need to try and keep the holes as vertical as possible and as accurate as possible, because this lot all has to feed together. And then you need to cut a 51mm hole, and that's a fairly straightforward exercise. I found it was easier to go halfway through, flip the block and then drill through the other way. Keeps the heat down and makes less friction, less melted plastic. Bit of a clean up. This still needs a little bit of a sand inside just to make the surface smooth, but it's fundamentally there. This part, cutting the hole, you really do need a cobalt hole cutter or something a bit stronger than the average that you would buy in a kit. Okay, next step is to assemble everything together, and it's just literally a case of feeding the bolts through, then a bit of persuading through, and then once we've got that in place, we take 4 nuts, spin that on, like so. And there we are, not quite bedded down yet, but we're getting there. You adjust the nuts here to give the spacing to keep the block parallel. So I've got these more or less set right. I just need to get all the angles right. And you're actually adjusting it so that this plate here is flush with the top, so this actually has to come up a bit. Bottom line is, once this is flush and this is reasonably tight, the whole turret should be able to run freely round without binding anywhere. It's just not far off at the moment. There's a couple of little adjustments which I'll do off camera. Okay, I've done the first initial setup. It's more or less about right. There's a little bit of sanding and stuff still to be done, as I said earlier. but you can see it rotates and there's very little play up and down. That's a reasonably good indicator that the gap here is about right. This gap is also variable depending on how the turret fits onto the actual vane itself, because it gives you the height adjustment of the cog. So next job would be to attach this to the turret, to the actual wind vane itself. A first step is to place the turret into the wind vane. The hole's already pre-drilled obviously. Slot it in. This bit actually you need probably 5 pair of hands, and then we take our worm gear, and this will fit on the outside here. As you can see already, these are actually meshing reasonably well. This is where you find out how accurate your cutting and setting up has been. And I'll just put the nuts on to hold it, and the final part of all of this exercise, once we've got these bolts done up reasonably tight, will be to put all of these nuts and bolts and adjusters need to be fitted and adjusted so that everything's in the right place. And that's a bit of fiddle, I have to say. Here's a close up. As you can see, the worm gear is a little bit on the low side, and it's probably just a little bit close to the actual cog itself. So this is now down to adjusting all the nuts and bolts so that everything lines up in the right places. You can adjust here and here to get these all to line up. You do have to make a clearance hole there for the rope for that, because as you can see this is actually stuck. So a little bit over tight at the moment, relatively straightforward to sort that one out. Right, the bolts here can be used to lift this whole mechanism up and down to engage the cog, and you can also tilt by adjusting the length of these compared with these, so you can move the whole thing in and out like that. So at the moment that's reasonably well adjusted. I'm going to demonstrate. So by attaching a drill, the whole thing is moving quite smoothly. The electric drill makes it much easier to demonstrate. All we need to do now is just basically tighten up everything into its final assembly, and attach the actual vane mechanism. Final part of the assembly is to add this bracket, which holds this bit of string, which will then restrain the balance arm to 45 degrees. You have to bend it as sharp as possible on this bend, and then again a bend here just to make sure everything's clear. And I had to take the grinder to the bottom corner of this just to make sure there was adequate clearance. Pretty straightforward though. And I've got a little piece of string here, which is not the final part, but you can see if I can move it around, and the turret and the vane will be self-steered. Hi there everybody, thank you for watching the videos, and if you have any comments or suggestions about what else you'd like to see, drop me a note in the comment section, or if you feel really generous, subscribe and keep the channel going. If there is anything you'd like to see in particular, really just send me a comment or a request. And fair winds and happy sailing for you in 2018 and onwards.